My name is Rick, and for almost a decade, my life was the road. As a sales rep for an agricultural supplies company, my territory was the rural interior of the Midwest. I knew every curve, every tiny town, every gas station along the highways between Kansas City and the Colorado state line. And more than anything, I knew the loneliness of those endless straightaways cutting through the plains in the middle of the night. Driving before dawn had always been part of the job. The silence, the empty highway, the flat landscape under the moonlight, all of that puts you into a kind of trance, a dangerous hypnosis. You turn up the radio, chug gas station coffee, but your mind still starts to wander. And it was on one of those nights, on a particularly desolate stretch of US Highway 50, that it happened for the first time. The road was a thin line of asphalt in the middle of nowhere. Dark fields stretched out as far as I could see, and the only light came from my own headlights cutting through the black. I was about 60 miles away from a small town called Dodge City, and the fatigue was beginning to hit hard. That's when I checked my rearview mirror and saw them. 2 points of light, round and bright, rising over the horizon and closing in at an impressive speed. My first reaction was irritation. Another maniac in a hurry, I muttered to myself. On a highway like that, completely empty, there was no reason for someone to be driving that fast. I eased off the gas a little, figuring they'd just pass me and disappear into the night. But they didn't. The headlights came closer and closer until they were right on my bumper, way too close. The harsh light flooding the inside of my car and blinding me in the mirror. That's when it stopped being annoying and started feeling dangerous, reckless. I tried to stay calm, hoping the driver would get the hint and go around me. A minute passed, then 2, then 5. Nothing. The lights stayed there, glued to my rear, like 2 bright eyes staring at me through the darkness. Fed up with the stupid game, I decided to let them pass. I flipped on my blinker and eased over onto the shoulder, slowing down. I braced myself for the blast of light as they pulled around me, maybe even a quick honk, either a thanks or an insult. But what came instead was nothing. No car passed. I waited a few seconds, confused, looked back at the empty highway ahead of me. No one. Then checked the rearview mirror again. Empty. The headlights were gone. Just gone. As if someone had flipped a switch and turned them off. I brought the car to a full stop on the shoulder and twisted around in my seat, squinting into the dark behind me. Nothing. Just the endless, silent stretch of highway. My heart was beating a little faster now. Had I imagined it? Some kind of reflection? My brain playing tricks on me from the lack of sleep? I shrugged it off, trying to grab onto any logical explanation I could find. I started the car again and pulled back onto the road, but the feeling didn't go away. The rest of that drive, I couldn't shake the sensation that something was still back there in the dark, watching me. A few weeks went by, and the routine of the road swallowed the memory of that night. I convinced myself it had just been exhaustion, a weird reflection, some kind of optical illusion caused by the monotony of the night scenery. Life went on, with sales targets, cheap motels, and bad coffee from highway diners. Until about a month later, I found myself on that exact same stretch of US Highway 50, at almost the same time of night. A chill ran down my spine the moment I realized where I was. Part of me wanted to speed up, get past that area as fast as I could. The other part, the logical one, kept saying I was being stupid. It was just a road. But like some kind of sick joke from fate, when I glanced at the rearview mirror, I saw them again. The same 2 points of light, appearing out of nowhere and closing in fast. This time, the irritation was gone. In its place, a cold, heavy fear settled in my chest. This wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. They drew closer and once again glued themselves to my rear bumper. That harsh, aggressive light poured into the car, filling everything. But this time, something was different. The headlights blinked. Once, one long, deliberate flash. Then twice, two short, quick blinks. My blood ran cold. That wasn't random. It felt like a pattern, like a code. Morse code, SOS. My brain went into overdrive, trying to pull some meaning out of those flashes. The fear that had started as a knot in my stomach was turning into full-blown panic. Who was in that car? What did they want? I decided I wasn't going to make it easy. I stepped on the gas. The engine roared in the silence of the night. 75, 80, 85 miles an hour. A dangerous speed for that kind of highway. But no matter how fast I went, the headlights stayed at the exact same distance. Not closer, not farther. As if they were tied to my car by some invisible rope. They blinked again. Two long flashes, one short. The light show didn't stop. It just kept going, more and more intimidating. I was sweating through my shirt, my hands locked around the steering wheel so tight my fingers hurt. I had to get out of that situation. Then I remembered what I'd done the first time. Maybe that was what they wanted. Heart pounding in my throat, I flipped on the blinker and pulled onto the shoulder, braking hard. I came to a stop and stayed there, engine running, waiting. And just like the first time, nothing happened. No car passed. The headlights that had been blinding me in the mirror just seconds before were gone, vanished into the darkness. This time, I didn't move. I turned off the engine and stayed there, in absolute silence, for almost half an hour, shaking, trying to make sense of what was happening. This wasn't a prank. It wasn't some bored driver messing with me. It was something else, something I couldn't explain. And that feeling that I was being watched, hunted by something that didn't belong to this world, started to sink in and make a home inside me. After the second time it happened, the fear finally settled in for real. I started avoiding night driving at all costs. I changed my whole routine, left home earlier, spent the night in towns that weren't even on my original route. Anything just so I wouldn't have to be out on the highway after sunset. My wife noticed the change, the stress, the dark circles under my eyes. I tried to explain, but how do you tell a story like that without sounding insane? I'm a wildlife biologist. My work is a mix of passion and adventure. I spend weeks at a time out in the field, deep in forests and national parks, studying how animals behave in their natural habitat. And to get to those remote places, the road is basically my second home. I've driven on every kind of path you can imagine. Busy highways, endless gravel roads, muddy tracks that barely deserve to be called roads at all. And on all those trips, I've always been extra careful with animals on the road. It's part of my job, part of my respect for life. But on a hot, suffocating summer night in the backcountry of West Texas, all that care wasn't enough. I was on my way back from an expedition in Big Bend National Park, driving along a winding reddish dirt road, surrounded by thorny scrub and desert brush. The night was pitch black, no moon, the kind of heavy air that promises a storm that never comes. I was driving slowly, high beams on, scanning the sides of the road for any movement. In that region, the chances of an animal darting out in front of you are pretty high, and that's exactly what happened. In a split second, A dark blur leapt out of the scrub, straight into the path of my car. There was no time to react. The impact was brutal. I felt the hard, sickening thud against the front of the vehicle, heard metal crunch, and the whole car jolted violently. I slammed my foot on the brake with everything I had, heart racing, tires skidding and throwing up clouds of dust and loose dirt. The car finally came to a stop, maybe 150 feet ahead, right in the middle of that empty road. I stayed there for a few seconds, frozen, trying to process what had just happened. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. From the size of the shadow and the force of the hit, I figured it had to be a medium to large animal. A deer, maybe, or a coyote, maybe even a wild hog. The first thing that crossed my mind was the animal's pain. For someone like me, trained to protect wildlife, the idea that I might have badly injured or killed a creature like that. It was devastating. I had to get out. I had to see what had happened, and if it was still alive, I had to try to help. I flipped on the hazard lights, reached into the glove compartment, and grabbed my strongest flashlight. Then I opened the door. The warm, dry air of the desert hit me right away. Out there, the silence was almost absolute. Just the sound of crickets and my own heartbeat hammering in my ears. I aimed the flashlight toward the front of the car. The front bumper was crushed, one of the headlights shattered. The damage was bad, no doubt about it. I took a deep breath and started walking back along the road, following the trail of scattered plastic and bits of metal, searching for the animal's body. But the farther I walked, the stranger it felt. There was nothing. No blood, no fur, no movement in the brush. Nothing at all. Absolutely nothing. I walked slowly along the dirt road, my flashlight beam sweeping over the reddish ground and the shoulder. I expected to find a body, or at least a blood trail, fur, some trace of the animal I'd hit. But there was nothing. The ground was clean, except for the scattered plastic from my busted bumper. I went back to the exact spot where I figured the impact had happened. Nothing. The total absence of any sign was unsettling. How was that possible? The impact had been real. The damage to my car was real. How could an animal that size just vanish without leaving anything behind? I started questioning my own perception. Had it been something smaller? A piece of dead branch falling onto the road? No. The shape I'd seen was big. It had the outline of an animal. I was sure of that. The adrenaline of the moment might have messed with my sense of size, but not with the nature of what I'd seen. Frustrated and confused, I began searching more methodically. I stepped off the road and started combing through the low, thorny brush on the sides. The silence of the night was starting to feel heavier, almost oppressive. That's when I saw it. Under the flashlight beam, in a patch of dry, cracked mud near a skid mark I assumed was from my own tires, something stood out. A footprint. But it wasn't a normal footprint. I'm a wildlife biologist. I know the tracks of the local fauna. Cougar, coyote, deer, wild hog. I'd recognize any of those instantly. But this was different. The track was big, nearly the size of my hand. It had 3 long, thin toes, each ending in a sharp claw, and a strangely elongated heel. It didn't look like anything I'd ever seen in any field guide or research paper. The shape was vaguely reptilian, and at the same time, it had features you'd expect from a mammal. It was an anomaly, a biological impossibility. I stayed crouched there, staring at that footprint, a chill running through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. The mystery of the missing animal was giving way to something else. A growing fear. What kind of creature could leave a mark like that? And where had it gone? I looked around, into the darkness of the desert scrub surrounding the road. The landscape that had always been my workplace and my passion suddenly felt alien, hostile. The silence was no longer just silence. It felt like the absence of sound from something out there, watching me. My hands were shaking so badly that the first pictures I took with my phone came out blurred. I forced myself to steady my grip, breathed deep, and took a few better shots. I needed a record, proof that I wasn't losing my mind. Once I was sure I had a clear image, I stood up and headed back to the car, this time at a near run. I got in, locked the doors, and pulled away from there as fast as I could, without completely losing control on the dirt road. I still didn't know what I had hit that night, but for the first time in my life, I was afraid of that landscape. And the image of that bizarre footprint stayed burned into my mind, a terrifying riddle that I knew would haunt me for a long time. In the days that followed, I couldn't think about anything else. The image of that footprint wouldn't leave my mind. I showed the photo to other biologists, seasoned researchers, even a few old trackers and ranch hands from the region. Nobody could identify it. The reactions ranged from disbelief to pure fascination, but no one had an answer. Some suggested it could be a deformity, some kind of genetic anomaly in a known species. Others, half joking, mentioned dinosaurs and aliens. But I knew it was something else. I decided to dig into it on my own. I buried myself in books on cryptozoology, obscure internet forums about strange creatures, eyewitness accounts of weird sightings. Nothing fit perfectly. But when I started looking into old desert folklore from the American Southwest, I found something. A local legend, almost forgotten, about a creature called the Labatut. The stories were old, passed down by families who'd lived for generations in the most remote corners of that region. They described a tall, bipedal creature. My name is Andrew, and I'm a civil engineer. Because of my job, I travel a lot, inspecting projects in remote areas, places you reach by driving down back roads that feel like they've been forgotten by time. I'm a practical, skeptical person. My world is made of calculations, physics, things that can be measured and explained. At least, that's what I used to think. Until my work started taking me, over and over again, across a particular bridge in rural Oklahoma. A bridge the locals quietly call the River of Souls Bridge. The first time I drove over it, I had no idea there was any story behind the place. It was a bright, sunny afternoon, and I was on my way to inspect a site in a nearby small town. The bridge itself was nothing special at first glance. An old concrete structure, long and a bit worn, spanning a wide river of dark, slow-moving water. The only thing that really caught my attention was the name of the river on the faded road sign, River of Souls. I remember thinking it was a little morbid, but I shrugged it off. As I started crossing the bridge, the first thing I noticed was the car radio. A cheerful song was playing, and suddenly the signal began to crackle. Static, then cutting in and out, and then nothing. Dead silence. The display was still on, but the sound was gone. I figured it was some kind of interference, maybe from the metal in the bridge structure. Annoying, but not exactly supernatural. Then something much stranger happened. A wave of sadness hit me. Not just a bad mood. This was a deep, crushing sadness that came out of nowhere. It didn't creep in slowly. It slammed into me. My throat tightened, and my eyes filled with tears. I had no idea why. There was nothing wrong in my life. Work was fine. My family was fine. There was no reason at all for me to feel that way. but it was like someone had opened a door inside my chest and poured all the grief in the world straight into me. It didn't feel like my own emotion. It felt like it belonged to someone else, like it was in the air, in the concrete, in the water below, like it belonged to the place. The feeling was so overwhelming that as soon as I reached the end of the bridge, I pulled over onto the shoulder. I sat there for about 10 minutes, completely undone, sobbing uncontrollably behind the wheel like a child. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The sadness faded. The knot in my throat loosened. My breathing evened out. I was left with nothing but confusion and a burning embarrassment at having had what felt like a full emotional breakdown for absolutely no reason. I turned the key, and the car started as if nothing had happened. The radio came back to life, the song continuing normally, no static, no problem. I drove on, pretending to myself that it had just been stress, that I was tired, overworked. I told myself to forget about that bizarre little episode. At the time, I thought that was going to be the last time the River of Souls Bridge had any effect on me. I had no idea it was only the beginning. About a month later, work took me back to the same area, and, inevitably, to the same bridge. This time, I thought I was ready. I'm not going to let this nonsense get to me again, I told myself as I approached. It didn't matter. The very moment my tires rolled onto the beginning of the bridge, the radio cut out again. No static, no warning, just dead silence. And then the sadness hit. The same wave of crushing grief as before, only stronger. It felt like mourning, like I'd just lost someone I loved more than anything. A sense of irreparable loss. I was suddenly overwhelmed by the desperate urge to stop the car right there in the middle of the bridge and throw myself into the dark river below. The thought was so strong, so strangely seductive, that I had to grip the steering wheel with all my strength just to keep going, to fight against an impulse that I knew wasn't mine. I crossed the bridge with my vision blurred by tears, my chest aching with a kind of anguish that felt old and shared, like the kind of pain that belongs to a crowd, not to a single person. As soon as I reached the other side, I pulled over onto the same shoulder as before, shaking, breathing hard, waiting for the feeling to fade. I couldn't pretend anymore. That wasn't stress. That wasn't fatigue. There was something on that bridge. In the small town where my worksite was located, I went looking for the oldest bar I could find. The kind of place where the walls are stained with time and the stories are older than the chairs. Behind the counter was an older man, the owner, with the look of someone who'd seen everything there was to see in that region. I ordered a coffee and, as casually as I could, asked him about the River of Souls Bridge. His smile disappeared. He stared at me for a moment, then said in a serious tone, "That bridge has a soul, son, and it's a sad one." Then he told me the story. Back in the 70s, a bus full of churchgoers was coming back from a big religious festival in a place everyone here calls Trinity Springs. It was late, people were tired, singing hymns, dozing off in their seats. Somewhere on that bridge, the driver lost control. To this day, no one really knows if it was brake failure, a bad overtake, or something else. What everybody agrees on is what happened next. The bus broke through the side rail and plunged into the river. The accident was horrific. More than 40 people died, many of them children. Most of them drowned, trapped inside the bus as it filled with black water. "It was the worst tragedy this region's ever seen," the old man said, his eyes distant, as if he were seeing it happen all over again. He went on to say that ever since that night, Strange things have been reported on the bridge. People who cross it feel a sudden, crushing sadness. Others say they hear crying and wailing coming from the river at night, or see shadows and strange lights moving just above the surface of the water. They say it's the souls of those church folks, he finished, lowering his voice. Stuck there, reliving the panic of their last moments. Every word felt like a punch to the gut. The sadness, the urge to cry, that suicidal pull toward the river. They weren't mine. They were theirs. Echoes of that tragedy soaked into the concrete, into the steel, into the dark water below. Knowing the story didn't make anything easier. If anything, it made it worse. Now the fear was tangled up with the sadness. In the weeks that followed, I had to cross that bridge a few more times. Every single crossing was torture. I'd hit the start of the bridge with my heart already racing. I'm a musician. My life is spending weekends playing in bars, small-town festivals, weddings, anywhere that needs live music as a soundtrack. Which means I drive. A lot. Mostly at night, on back roads most people don't even know exist. And it was on one of those roads, out in rural Ohio, that I had the strangest, saddest experience of my life. It was a Saturday, a little past 2 in the morning. I had just finished playing at a graduation party in a tiny town called Maple Ridge and was heading back home to Columbus. The route was a 2-lane state highway, dark and lonely, lined on both sides with endless soybean fields. I was tired, driving with the radio off, just the sound of the engine and the tires humming against the asphalt. The night was cold, and a thin mist was starting to form above the fields. Then I saw lights ahead, faint yellowish lights that looked completely out of place in all that darkness. As I got closer, the outline of an old toll plaza slowly appeared through the fog. A small concrete structure with just 2 booths, one for each direction. The barrier arms were raised, and most of the lights were off. The whole thing looked abandoned, like a concrete skeleton left behind when the world moved on. My first instinct was to just drive straight through. It was obviously deactivated. But as I approached the booth on my side of the road, I realized there was someone inside. An old woman, very old. Her white hair was pulled back in a bun, and she wore a knitted shawl over her shoulders. She sat on a small stool, her hands resting on the counter, gazing out at the road with a calm, almost peaceful expression. A single weak bulb above her head cast a pale light over her wrinkled face. I hesitated. It didn't make sense. A manual toll booth in the middle of the night, on a road with almost no traffic. But there was something about her presence, so quiet, so gentle, that made me feel like I should stop. Maybe she was a local, I thought, selling coffee, snacks, something to travelers passing through. I pulled up alongside the booth and rolled down the window. "Good evening," I said. She looked at me and smiled. A warm, genuine smile, showing a few missing teeth. "Good evening, son. God bless you," she answered, her voice soft and tired. She didn't ask me for money, didn't mention a toll. Instead, she reached out her small, wrinkled hand and handed me a piece of paper. It was a little holy card, the cheap kind you get at church, printed on thin paper, with an image of the Virgin Mary on the front and a short prayer on the back. "For your protection on the road," she said. I took the card, a bit unsure what to do with it. "Thank you. Can I give you something for it? A few dollars?" I asked. She shook her head gently, still smiling. "I don't want anything. I just want you to get home safe," she said. I thanked her again, rolled the window back up, and drove on. In the rear-view mirror, I watched the image of that old woman and the lonely little toll booth slowly fade into the fog. The whole situation had been strange, no doubt about it. But there was such sweetness in the way she'd looked at me that I drove away with a weirdly comforting feeling, as if someone had just tucked a blanket around my shoulders before I went back into the night. I had no idea that feeling was about to turn into a cold shiver running down my spine. I got home just before sunrise, completely wiped out. I dropped the little holy card the old woman had given me on my nightstand and passed out. The following week was hectic. Rehearsals, set lists, fixing gear, lining up the next round of weekend gigs. That strange toll booth and the sweet old lady stayed tucked in the back of my mind, like one of those quirky little road stories musicians collect over the years. The next Saturday, I had another show in the same region. This time, I wasn't alone. The whole band was with me. We were all crammed into my car, joking around, half asleep, half hyper on gas station coffee, when we hit the same stretch of road. It was daytime now. The sun was out, the sky clear, and everything looked completely different than it had the week before. As we started getting close to where I remembered the toll plaza, I leaned forward over the steering wheel, scanning the road ahead. "It's right up here," I said to my bass player in the passenger seat. "You guys are not going to believe what happened to me here last Saturday." But when we reached the exact point where I was sure the toll booth had been, there was nothing. I mean, almost nothing. In the spot where I was positive I'd stopped the car that night, there were only the remains of an old toll plaza. The concrete structure was still standing, but it was covered in graffiti. The booth windows were shattered. The barrier arms were long gone, just a couple of rusted metal posts sticking up like broken bones. It was obviously abandoned. Not from last month, from years ago. I pulled onto the shoulder, staring, my mind trying to catch up. "No way," I muttered. "This is it. I stopped right here. She was right there." I was talking more to myself than to the others. My friends just looked around with this "what are you on about" expression. "Dude, this place has been dead for ages," the drummer said.